Imagine being married and knowing that the night ahead could mark the end of your freedom, your dignity, or even your life. A night where love and fear are indistinguishable. What dark ritual did ancient Rome impose on newlywed women that history tried desperately to erase? In the annals of Roman history, much has been recorded: gladiators, emperors, and conquests. But some truths were buried, deliberately hidden from the eyes of future generations. One of the darkest, most disturbing practices was a wedding night ritual that most historians avoid mentioning, perhaps because it challenges our understanding of what society deemed acceptable. Tonight, we uncover a hidden world of fear, manipulation, and ritualized control, where the union of marriage was not only a personal milestone, but also a tool of domination. This is the story Rome tried to erase. Rome was a city of grandeur and spectacle, where marble columns rose into the sky and the Forum buzzed with life. To outsiders, it was the pinnacle of civilization, a place where law, order, and tradition reigned. But behind the polished veneers of the villas and the grandeur of the Senate lay rituals rooted in control, fear, and the assertion of power. Marriage in Rome was more than a bond of love. It was a social contract, a tool to secure alliances, property, and influence. Families orchestrated marriages like chess moves, positioning daughters and sons as pawns in the game of status and survival. But what many do not know is that the personal cost for women could be devastating. Newlyweds were celebrated with feasts, music, and elaborate processions, but the night after the wedding, an event intended to symbolize love and unity, could descend into terror. The bride, often a teenager, would be led to a room not as a sanctuary of intimacy, but as a stage for a ritual with its roots in the deepest fears of Roman patriarchy. The wedding night ritual was known to a few as lectistium nuptiale. Though details are scarce and scattered across obscure writing, it was both intimate and public, private yet observed. The bride, dressed in a flowing white tunic, her hair decorated with bright ribbons, would be placed on the bed by attendants. She would be surrounded by family members, a silent audience whose presence ensured obedience. A shocking fact: in some accounts, the bride was required to consume a mixture of herbs and substances meant to sedate or control her, effectively turning her into a passive participant. The ancient Romans believed this acted as a spiritual cleansing, but it also stripped her of choice. The groom, meanwhile, assumed a role of dominance. The ritual was not merely consummation, it was an enactment of patriarchal control, a ceremony where the power of the male over the female body was sanctified. In some elite households, this ritual extended beyond the bedroom. Symbols of fertility, including obscure amulets and objects shaped like phalluses, were strategically placed around the room to ensure the success of the marriage, turning intimacy into a performance governed by superstition and control. Fear was central to the ritual. Brides were not allowed to speak unless spoken to. Any hesitation or resistance could be interpreted as a bad omen, bringing shame to the family and dishonor to the groom. The ritual was as psychological as it was physical. Every gesture, every word was calculated to instill a sense of helplessness, ensuring compliance. Some historians hint at more disturbing practice. The bride's family might be instructed to leave the room with a solemn warning, emphasizing the bride's isolation. She was told that her future happiness, fertility, and even safety depended on submission. In certain accounts, failure to comply could result in severe punishment or social ostracization. This was a world where tradition masked coercion, where ceremony concealed cruelty. The bride's personal agency was sacrificed to the collective desire for lineage, inheritance, and societal approval. Roman weddings were filled with symbolism: roses, laurel crowns, and ceremonial torches. But some symbols were sinister. The bulla, a small protective amulet, was sometimes used to ward off evil spirits that could taint the bride's virtue. Yet this so-called protection reinforced control. The amulet was not a token of safety. It was a reminder that the bride's body, her choices, and her very soul were monitored. In some elite households, the ritual involved the ceremonial breaking of bread over the bride's head, a gesture meant to bind her to domestic obedience. What appears as tradition was in reality psychological conditioning. Every movement, every token, every whispered word served to remind the bride of her role: to obey, to endure, to reproduce. A chilling truth emerges here. What was framed as honor was often humiliation. The bride became an instrument of family prestige, her autonomy stripped, layer by layer, under the guise of ceremony. Unlike modern weddings, where the private night of a couple is sacred, Roman society often allowed the presence of silent witnesses. Female relatives, servants, and even distant kin might remain nearby, observing rituals meant to teach obedience. They watched, not to share in joy, but to enforce conformity. Their gaze was a tool of social pressure, reminding the bride that her actions were never entirely her own. This created an atmosphere of constant anxiety. Some brides reportedly wept quietly, fearful of judgment or punishment. Some ancient accounts suggest that women prepared for this night with spells, charms, and prayers, small acts of rebellion against a system designed to erase their agency. The tension was cinematic. A small room lit by flickering oil lamps, shadows stretching across faces filled with expectation, the bride trembling on the bed, aware that her life had just entered a new chapter of control and ritualized fear. In certain regions of the Roman Empire, the wedding night ritual extended into fertility rites that were deeply unsettling. The consummation of marriage was often preceded by symbolic acts meant to ensure the bride's fertility. Some accounts hint at the use of animal sacrifices or blood rituals designed to bind the union in ways that went beyond human law. These rituals were framed as protective and necessary, but they reinforced a disturbing reality. The bride's body was not her own. Her sexuality, her womb, her capacity to give life was a tool for the family, the lineage, and the state. In this context, the wedding night was not a celebration of love, but a performance of control, fear, and societal dominance. The individual desires of the bride were irrelevant, subsumed into a ritual that demanded obedience above all.
Why is this ritual largely absent from mainstream history books? Because the practice challenges the polished narrative of Rome as a civilization of law, reason, and order. It exposes a society willing to sacrifice individual humanity for the sake of tradition, status, and power. Ancient historians rarely mention the intimate ceremonies of the wedding night. When they do, it is in vague, euphemistic terms, hinting at obedience and virtue, without ever revealing the psychological terror involved. The silence is telling. Rome may have been a civilization of grandeur, but it was also a civilization capable of orchestrating cruelty under the guise of ritual. The implications of this ritual stretch far beyond its time. It reveals a society where control over women's bodies was normalized, where fear and superstition were tools of social order. For brides, it was a night that could define their entire lives, marking them as compliant, fertile, and loyal. It also exposes a darker truth about human societies. Rituals can be manipulated to enforce obedience. The veneer of tradition and honor often hides coercion, shame, and psychological terror. Even as empires rise and fall, these dynamics repeat in different forms, reminding us that power over others often masquerades as celebration. We are left with a haunting question. How many traditions in any era have roots in fear and control? How often have societies masked cruelty as ceremony and compliance as honor? The wedding night of ancient Rome was more than a ritual. It was a window into the mechanisms of power, the fragility of autonomy, and the lengths to which humanity can go to preserve control. As we reflect on this hidden history, one thing becomes clear. Beneath the splendor of Rome lies a world of shadows, where innocence was sacrificed and terror was ritualized. And perhaps, even today, there are ceremonies we accept without question, unaware of the invisible chains they impose.